Hi, my name is Dr. Patrick Tyner, and I'm currently the Director of Undergraduate Teaching for Politics and International Relations at the University of Edinburgh. I'm recording this in June 2025, and this is the current version of my Open Day talk. That's the talk I normally give at Open Days or Offer Holder Days, where I try to convince you that not only studying politics or IR is a good idea, but also that it's a good idea to study it with us. So in the next sort of 25 minutes or so, I'm going to try to give you an overview of the discipline, and I'm going to try to give you an introduction to how we teach politics, and then also to how politics teaching works in Edinburgh. I want you to have a couple of good points of comparison, because I'm assuming Edinburgh is not the only place you're considering. But while universities are very similar in some regards, they are very different in others, and I want to point out some of them in this talk. So let's get into it. Why is politics and IR even a good idea to study? Well, I think this is a worthwhile field because it takes the world as it currently is very seriously. It is very aware that the world is hyper complex and hyper interdependent. Everything always seems to be connected to everything else. If you look at any page of the newspaper currently or watch anything online, you can see that it seems that lots and lots of problems are connected and seem really intractable. Like if you want to solve homelessness, you have to solve the housing crisis. And if you want to solve the housing crisis, you have to solve the economy. And to solve the economy, you have to solve trade. And to solve trade, you have to solve conflict and war. So everything seems to be really connected. And politics and IR are disciplines that are very comfortable with this. They are comfortable with it because in many of these problems and issues that we deal with, politics plays a large role. We want to believe that politics is often the solution to some of these problems, that politicians make the right choices and then the problems can be managed. But I think we also kind of intuitively understand that oftentimes politics can be part of the problem. If you look at, take a random sample of political systems around the world at the moment, and you will see that often they are described as being dysfunctional, for example, or as being disinterested, maybe even in solving the problems. And the underlying reason for why we need politics and IR to look at all of these issues, to understand them better, is that politics is really in everything nowadays. If you just look at your personal life, which side of the road you drive on is politics. It was a political decision at some point. How much taxes you pay, how good your school is, who you can marry, whether your state is at war or not. All these things are politics. Politics is in almost every aspect of society at this point. So understanding how the political process works and how states interact at the international level can often really help us understand why political problems at the international level and the national level are created and what is being attempted to solve them. So because politics is in everything and everywhere, PIR also really cuts across clear disciplinary boundaries. That's a fancy way of saying that we like to steal ideas from others, other disciplines. So, for a while we stole all kinds of ideas from philosophy and history, and then we discovered economics, and we stole all kinds of economic ideas, and then sociology, and so on. So it's a very kind of big tent discipline. There's very few things that we don't like to investigate, and there's very few methods which we don't use to investigate that. Everything from, sitting down and doing interviews, doing really in-depth what we call qualitative work, all the way to the other side where we work with gigantic spreadsheets and numbers and try to figure out mathematically almost how the world works and what laws it follows. Now you might say, look, Patrick, that sounds great, looking at current problems, the world is complex, blah, blah, that's all great, but how does this translate into something that I can do after I've studied this for a while? So the way we kind of describe our graduates is that we want them to understand complex global processes and the politics behind them, meaning you're very comfortable with the complexity of the world, you're okay with the world being, messy, with things being connected, and we want you to understand and being able to explain what the politics side is of all of these problems. We want you to critically assess problems and situations, and critical is the main word here. Critical really just means that you don't take things at face value. You are able to interrogate a hypothesis or a statement or an assertion, and you can bring evidence to bear to test whether that assertion is correct. So studying politics and IR is not about finding the right opinion or just arguing well. It is connecting evidence to real-world phenomena. There is something happening in the world. I want to explain that. So how do I think through this systematically and analytically and come to a good reasoned conclusion? Oftentimes, to come to these conclusions, you have to create, analyze, and interpret data. Lots and lots of politics is data-driven nowadays. It's very hard to argue that, for example, you need to kick out all immigrants if you don't have a threatening red line behind you pointing upwards. And you, as politics and IR students, should be able to not just be taken in by such displays. You need to understand how data is created, what it means, and how to interpret it yourself. We want you to use evidence to make persuasive arguments. So again, this is not a debating club, right? We don't teach you how to win a debate in the parliament. We teach you how to connect evidence to phenomena. And if I had to describe you in one word, I would describe our graduates as problem solvers. We want you to be able to be dropped into almost any complex situation, have ways and methods to figure out what is happening and why that's happening, and then also to understand and explain to others what that means and what can be done about it. So navigating a complex globalized world, I think, is a skill that you get with politics and IR studies. Again, you might say, Patrick, sounds great. I'd love to navigate a complex world, but haven't really seen any job listings for complex world navigator. You're right. So empirically speaking, our graduates go into particular fields, but like in any social science discipline, you kind of have to find your own path with a politics or IR degree. That's the case really for lots and lots of degrees. If you study robotics, it's pretty clear you build robots. But if you do a social science or a humanities degree, that tends to not qualify you for very specific jobs. You have to find your niche. You have to find what you like and what you're good at, and then make a living in this. But if we look at our graduates, we can see that they go into particular fields with a higher probability. So for example, civil service and diplomacy, you might work for a ministry, for example, you might work as a diplomat. It doesn't have to be international work, of course. You can just work for a domestic ministry or a political body in the UK or in your home country. You could work for domestic and international political institutions. That could be a parliament, that could be a parliamentarian. You might work for an MP, for example, or you could work for a party. International political institutions means international organizations like the UN, for example. Unfortunately, if you have a UK passport, not the EU anymore. Used to be a big job field. Unfortunately, not anymore. RIP. You could go into policy advice, research, and policy making, meaning you essentially continue what you do during your studies. You analyze politics, you explain that to others really well, and you just keep doing that. A think tank is an example of this, where you analyze current problems and you help others understand them better. Speaking of which, journalism is also a field that many of our graduates go into, because journalism in the end is really just helping your reader understand the world a little better. And the PIR degree, I think, qualifies you pretty well for that, and qualifies you also to explain that to others. Journalism tends to be one of those fields where few people are actually trained journalists as a degree. Oftentimes you come into that from other directions, so politics and IR is perfectly capable of doing that. We have an increasing number of graduates going into business, finance, and consulting, so things like a risk consultant is a thing that used to not really be there, say 20 years ago or something. Nowadays it is, because economical decisions you shouldn't really leave that to economists. That's a terrible idea. Imagine, someone asking you as a multi-billion-dollar global company, should we invest in Malaysia? You can't just leave that to the economists, because they would look at growth rates, for example, and say, yeah, sure, 6% annual growth sounds like a great idea. No, you need a political scientist to then say, well, hold on though. Maybe we should also look at the stability of the political system, the human rights situation, or the PR implications from workers' rights violations. Is this a good idea to invest beyond just the economic factors? So going into consultancy, for example, is something that is done increasingly by our graduates. And then lastly, but also not really, politics. We don't train you to be politicians. The analogy I always make is that we are the people building the rocket, we're not the astronauts. So we are outside the system looking in, we're analysts. We're not teaching you how to, shake hands or knock on doors or give speeches in parliament, like I already said. We teach you how to understand these things, but not necessarily do them. That doesn't mean there's never any political science graduates in politics. Actually, John Sweeney, the current Scottish First Minister, is a political science graduate from Edinburgh, so you can do it, but that's not really the main point of the degree. So it's a highly flexible degree. You can do many different things, but that also means you have to be a little bit okay with uncertainty. You have to sort of find your path through the degree. So what do we teach you when we teach you about politics? Just really briefly, what do we understand by politics? We understand at least three things by politics. So institutions and groups. So we teach you about what role different state institutions play. This might be kind of similar to what you already learned in school. So how does parliament work? How do executives work? But also not just in the UK, of course, but also elsewhere. A politics degree is not a UK politics degree. It's a general politics degree. We look at political parties, NGOs, but also some actors that are not elected. And there things can get quite interesting quite fast. You can all think of current actors that are quite important in politics. Look at Elon Musk, for example, that are not themselves elected, but that seem to hold sway over political decisions to a large part. That brings us then to people and processes. So who gets to make these decisions? Who's represented? We're coming away from the kind of slightly formulaic, just looking at, what is a constitution and how is the country governed, to maybe softer questions that don't have an obvious answer. Who actually gets to make the decisions is not always just determined by how a country's government is set up. So, for example, we can see that certain groups in society are systematically underrepresented in decision making. They don't tend to get a seat at the table. But we might ask, in a democracy where everyone can vote, why is a democracy not catering equally to all voter groups? So who is systematically left out? If you have a profile like me, for example, you're a middle-aged, white, straight man, that tends to be pretty good for you in almost all countries, including the UK. While if you don't fall into any of those categories, if you're a person of color, if you're a woman, if you're coming from a lower socioeconomic background, it is much harder for you to be represented in politics and for politics to be made for you. Ideas and ideals is the last area that we look at. It's a fancy way of saying kind of political philosophy or political ideas, maybe. And here we really ask about the norms that are behind the political decisions that are being made. So, how can a society be made just? What does that even mean? What is a fair society, and how do we know it when we see it? How can inequality be addressed, for example, and what's our responsibility not just towards our own citizens, but also towards the citizens elsewhere? So here we can be normative. We don't just ask, how is politics, but also we can ask, how should politics be? Now, when we study international relations, we take very much the same categories, the processes, the people, the institutions, the ideas, and we transport this to the international level. So IR kind of starts where the state ends. We're not really concerned anymore with domestic politics. We are concerned with things that happen when states interact at the international level. Interact sounds kind of benign, but of course many of these interactions are quite problematic. They can, for example, mean war. As I record this in June 2025, the conflict in Ukraine, the Russian invasion of Ukraine is still dragging on 3 years on. And we've just, a few days ago had mutual attacks by Israel and Iran. So war, of course, is a perpetual challenge of state interactions. But also things like climate change, terrorism, trade, human rights, and development are all things that can happen when states interact. And the interesting thing is that about 100 years ago, states realized that the problems had become so big, so complex, and so interdependent that individual states could not solve them. If the UK decides tomorrow that we want to solve climate change, that really isn't going to matter much because the UK is not solely able to solve this as a problem. It's an international problem. It's a global problem. So normally these global problems need global solutions. And these international solutions often take the shape of international organizations. States are kind of coming together and they are trying to cooperate to address certain problems. In the UN, the problem is war. The UN was created to prevent another world war, and at least at that, it's been successful. The EU also was created to preserve peace through economic prosperity, and at that, it's done a pretty good job. So, if I've convinced you, hopefully so far, that this might be quite an interesting thing to study, how does studying PIR work in Edinburgh? So we have a number of different degree programs, and the main confusing thing is that there is no politics and IR degree. There's no PIR degree. I know we're called PIR, but there's no PIR degree. You have to choose between either studying politics or international relations. But I might say this again further on in the video, but this is a difference on paper more than in practice. There are no courses that are only designed for politics students or only for IR students. Both of these different degrees can access all the courses that we offer. It's mainly a question of what do you want to communicate to others. If you have a politics degree, people might assume that you are more interested maybe in domestic politics, UK politics. Well, if you have an IR degree, that indicates that you are, interested in international problems and international solutions. But for the daily studies that you do, it makes very little difference. So that out of the way, how can you study it? Well, the first thing you could do is apply for a single honors degree. So you have one main subject. That means that one main subject gives you its compulsory courses. And because there's only one subject, that tends to leave quite a lot of room for things that you can choose. Because that main subject isn't going to take up all your time. You can do that by applying for a politics degree, a single honors politics degree, or a single honors IR degree, like I said. Things get quite interesting when you start combining stuff. So this is what we call a joint honors degree. So in a joint honors degree, you choose two subjects, not any two subjects. It's a specific list of subjects you can combine. And each of these two subjects gets an equal weight, meaning you take roughly the same amount of credits over the 4 years of your degree in the one subject as in the other. And you can combine politics with a number of different other subjects like economics and history. Those are all most popular degrees. You can do philosophy in politics, sociology in politics, social anthropology in politics, or a lot of other modern languages like German, Italian, French, Spanish, Arabic, and so on. You can also do two very specific joint degrees that don't sound like joint degrees on the surface, but they are. That's our politics or IR with quantitative methods degrees. So here, basically half of your credits come from the quantitative methods field. Fancy way of saying statistics. We train you to do statistical analysis, data analysis, and we teach you some quantitative skills that are really, really valuable job market skills. Not enough people apply for these degrees. I think people are sleeping on these because they sound like you need to be super good with numbers. And yes, you shouldn't, blanch when you see a spreadsheet or a number, but they're not that difficult. But they are really valuable because they do really teach you something that the regular degrees do not. You can also combine politics with law. There's two different law degrees where you can combine either IR or politics with them, but those are importantly LLB degrees, meaning you get a law degree at the end, while all the other joint honors degrees all give you an MA at the end. And then lastly, I'm not going to focus on this very much because PPE is its own kind of universe. You could even do more than a joint honors degree and do a triple honors degree. We're not supposed to call it that, but I'm calling it that. A triple honors degree means you combine 3 subjects, so 3 subjects give you their compulsory courses. And in PPE, that's politics, philosophy, and economics. You can think of the trade-off between single honors and joint honors programs as a trade-off between flexibility and expertise. In a single honors degree, you have a lot of flexibility because you have a lot of room to choose things that you want because you only have one subject that gives you its compulsory courses. On a joint honors degree, you have less flexibility because you get it from 2, but you can also at the end say, I'm not just a political scientist, I'm also an economist, or a historian, or a philosopher, or a sociologist, and so on. So if you are very sold on liking 2 disciplines, there's nothing wrong with a joint honors degree. Although in a single honors degree, you have more flexibility. So if you know you want to do politics, but you're unsure about your other discipline, that I think a single honors degree might be the better choice. Because even on the single honors degree, you can still take courses in economics or history or sociology and so on. So those are not just open for students with a joint honors degree. The general degree structure is a 4-year degree. This is important because if you study on the continent or in the US or in England, for example, those tend to be 3-year bachelor's degrees, while Edinburgh like many other Scottish universities, offers a 4-year MA degree. It's not an MSc degree, because they're not a postgraduate, it's their first degree after school. So it is an undergraduate degree, but it is a 4-year degree. And because you study for 4 years, not just for 3, you get an MA degree at the end. The MA indicates that you've had an additional year of training over someone with a 3-year BA. So the 4 years fall apart into 2 halves, basically. There's 2 years that we call the pre-honors years, where we lay the groundwork, the foundations. You get lots of courses that are called Introduction to X and Introduction to Y. And we want to basically get everyone up to the same speed, and we lay the groundwork for advanced courses you take later. The courses here that you take in year 1 and 2 do not count towards your final degree classification. So the mark you get on your final degree at the end of the 4 years is not dependent on your marks in years 1 and 2. We think that's a good idea because it gives you a gentler ramp into university, and university is a learned skill. Not everyone is great at this right from the start. Not everyone comes from a family that knows how university works. I didn't when I did my university, and I had no clue what I was doing for the first couple of years. So we think it's a good idea to have you pass the classes, of course, but how well you pass them essentially does not matter for your degree at the very end. The method of delivery across the pre-honors years is often lecture-based, meaning you might sit in a room with a couple of hundred students, but that's not the only way we instruct you. Normally, when you have a lecture-based course, that is then augmented by having weekly tutorials. So think of 12 to 14 people in a room with a tutor, meaning a PhD student, for example, that leads a discussion around a certain topic. So that is always, big lectures always tend to be combined with small group teaching as well. Then once you make it through the pre-honors years, you enter what we call the honors years. And the idea here is that almost all the compulsory courses go away after pre-honors, and you really can make almost all the choices over what you're doing. And it is through your choices that you can find your niche and specialize and separate yourselves from other people that are studying the same thing. You go abroad in 3rd year, never in 2nd, never in 4th, and about, I think, 40% of our students go abroad every year, so it's a significant chunk, but it's not like everyone goes abroad. Staying in Edinburgh is completely fine. If you are an international student, then going to Edinburgh is already being abroad, and then going abroad while you're abroad, bit extra. Don't think that's necessarily necessary. So you can go abroad, and you apply during your 2nd year. And your final degree classification, like I already said, is determined by your honors marks. So how well you do in years 3 and 4 will determine how good the mark is that you get for your degree overall. How does this degree look like? I'm going to illustrate this just in the case of the single honors politics degree here for a second. So you can see a couple of things here. It's a 4-year degree, I've already said that. And you have a number of compulsory courses each year. And what you can see here is that beginning in year 1 already, because this is a single honors degree, you have 3 compulsory courses: Politics NIR 1A, which I convene, Politics NIR 1B, and Political Thinkers, which is our introduction to political philosophy. So 3 compulsory courses, but each year you have to take 6 courses. Only 3 of them are compulsory, so you see that in year 1 you already can make 3 choices over what other courses to take. You could take more politics courses here if you want, of course, Introduction to British Politics, for example, or Understanding Gender. Or you could take courses in our sister subjects in the school, like take a sociology course or a social anthropology course. Or, take a course in economics or history or law. Take a language course, for example. Take a year-long language course if you want, like, learn Arabic, learn Chinese, refresh your French, whatever you feel like. And what you see here is that each year that you progress in the degree, the number of compulsory courses goes down. So you have 3 compulsory courses in 1st year, 2 in 2nd year, only 1 compulsory course in 3rd year, and then you have no compulsory courses at all in 4th year, because all you have is your course options that you can choose, and then you also choose your dissertation. The dissertation is the capstone project, where you propose a topic. So you choose the topic of something you want to research, and then you research that over the course of your 4th year under the supervision of a staff member. And you can basically research just about anything. A couple of years back, I had someone research, for example, whether the way that the Cannes Film Festival was giving out its prizes to movies was political. And he found that movies that are speaking to current political topics had a higher probability of receiving a Cannes Film Prize. So, if you're an aspiring filmmaker, there's some research you can do. So this is really all the way up to you. So each year you progress in a degree, we increase the amount of choice that you have. Just to illustrate, on the IR degree, it looks very similar. And remember how I told you a couple of slides back that the differences on paper more than in practice is you see that the difference between the politics and the IR degree is largely just a difference of one compulsory course in second year. Everything else is almost the same. And then to illustrate how differently this can look from a joint honors degree, this is an example of a joint honors degree, the economics and politics degree. And you see here that in the first year, you still have the same PIR 1A and PIR 1B courses as your compulsories, but you also have Economics 1 as a compulsory course from the other subject. So you have less choice here. In year 1, you have only 2 choices you can make versus 3 in the single honors degree. And in year 2, actually, you can only make 1 choice rather than 4 choices like you can on the single honors degree. So in return, of course, you get to call yourself an economist and a political scientist, but it does reduce the overall degree of choice that you have. Now, what can you do with this choice? I've been harping on why is choice so important? Well, what you can do at honors is you can choose honors courses. So the way we do this is we basically give you a very big menu of specialized seminar-style courses. So think of this as 30 to 40 people courses, more like a school class, always taught by a staff member, and that staff member suggests and the course topic and designs the course. So in year 3 and 4, you choose specific specialized courses, and ideally, through those course choices, you define your own specialization. So you're not just an IR graduate, for example. You would say, well, look, I'm an IR graduate, but I'm actually really interested in the Middle East. So I took Arabic in years 1 and 2 as a language course, and then at honors, I picked a course on, say, politics of the Middle East, for example, on the right-hand side. I'm interested in issues of gender in the region, so I took gender, peace, and security. Maybe I took a course that's not in here, but it's called Politics of Oil. So a course that looks at states that use resource extraction as their main source of revenue. And so by assembling these specialized courses at the end of your degree, you can tell someone, as you're looking for jobs, for example, yes, I'm an IR specialist, and my particular expertise lies in the Middle East, or in Latin America, or in international organizations, or in gender, or in human rights protection, or something else. And we offer a lot of these honors course options. In 25-26, so the upcoming academic year, we offer almost 60 of these courses. We have very big political science departments, one of the biggest in the UK, which also means we can offer you a very big menu of specialized courses that you can take and which you can use to define your own niche. In addition to the courses that we offer in PIR, because this is just PIR courses, you can also take honors courses from other subjects in the school, so a sociology course or a social anthropology course. And you can also additionally take some honors courses in other schools, like economics or history or something. Sometimes even honors courses from other colleges. One of my students once tried to do an astrobiology course. Terrible. I mean, she said, I loved it. I was terrible at it, but it was nice. Don't do that. But anyway, you have a very, very big menu because Edinburgh is a very big place, meaning your choice is, you have a very, very diverse choice of course options. This is just to show you that the people that are running these specific courses normally run them because that is their own research expertise. So they publish on it. For example, Claire Duncanson, who wrote a book recently on gender and peace building, runs a course called Gender, Peace, and Security. Not that. So you have an expert teaching on their own expertise in a small seminar-style setting. Now, going abroad, you might be interested, how do I go abroad? Just briefly, if you do want to find out more, you can Google Edinburgh Global. That's the part of university that arranges the exchanges. If you go abroad, like I already said, you go abroad in third year, you apply during your second year, and this does not affect the overall length of your program. Some 3-year BAs allow you to go abroad, but if you go abroad, it basically adds a year, like you suddenly do a 4-year degree then. That's not the case here. Your third year abroad just takes the place of your Edinburgh third year. We cooperate with over 70 universities around the world. They are on every continent, and I think we're currently working on Africa. I think we're working on, no, American University Cairo, so we have Africa in there, I think. But there's a wide variety of countries, and because Edinburgh has a very, very good reputation worldwide, that also means that whatever university we cooperate with that is abroad tends to also be one of the very, very best universities in that particular country. So I've given you a little bit of a list here of places you can go to. In Europe alone, Amsterdam, Copenhagen, Free University of Berlin, Louis in Rome, Sciences Po Paris, always the most popular choice. Everyone wants to go to Paris, but also Zurich and Dublin. And then around the world, for example, we cooperate with lots and lots of universities in America, although people are understandably at the moment slightly hesitant to go to America. Who could have told that politics has an effect on this kind of thing? But if you still are considering the US, we have some of the very best American universities in here, everything from Berkeley to Cornell to Georgetown in Washington, D.C., which is where all the American diplomats are educated, for example. So we have a big menu of options, again, that you can choose from, over 70 for you, that you can apply during a second year and then go abroad in your third year. Now, the last thing I want to leave you is why should you study PR in Edinburgh? So a little bit of a wrap up here. I think the first thing is you should consider the city. I think people sometimes try to disembody the university they study at from the city that it's in. But that's not that good an idea, because you have control over many things at university, but not the place it's located. So you should go somewhere you want to be. You will be going to be here for 3 or 4 years in the place that you choose, so you want to be somewhere where you have a good quality of life. I think Edinburgh is a fantastic city. It regularly, ends up in global rankings of the best cities to live in. It's just the right size. It's big enough that there's something going on at all times, but it's not so big that you feel like an ant in an anthill, like I always feel like that in London. It's also a capital city and a very political city. We have the Scottish Parliament here. We have NGOs here, some international organizations. It's a very big finance sector. So it's an interesting city, And, nothing against other places like St. Andrews. But, if you go to smaller places, those have that nice villagey feel. And that is great. I'm not trying to knock it. But once you've been to the pub and the club there, what are you doing for the other 3 years and 11 months of your life at university? We're very international and internationally connected. Our staff is very international. More than half of the people that are teaching you are not British, meaning they give you a good sort of varied perspective. And that's always a good thing in politics. Myself, I am German. My wife is American. I did my PhD in Dublin, then bounced back to Germany and then to the UK. So I've gotten around a little bit, and the same is true for most of my colleagues. I think the Scottish 4-year degree is a very good idea. I'm not personally a fan of this notion that you have to get into and out of university as quickly as you can. I think a 4-year degree gives you a little bit of extra time, not just to grow up, to be honest, but also to find your niche, define what you like and what you want to do afterwards. I think that additionally it can really help shape what you want to do after, rather than being rudderless for a year or so after graduating. We're a very large department, and while for you that might mean, we're a big place. I'm not going to lie, you're not going to know everyone in your program. You're not going to see all the staff members, even in 4 years. We are a very big place, but for you, size means choice, meaning we can offer you something in almost every area. We do world-leading research. We're in the top 50 of all universities in the world in basically every ranking that matters. And that means that the people that do teach you are world experts in their field. We've recently restructured our pre-honors curriculum, so we give you a better start, we hope, and we have a new student support system that's now been running a few years, where we try to do more to make you feel like you're part of a community rather than just a little cog in a very big place. And lastly, we have a very active and diverse student body. Again, this is a result of size, because what size here does is whatever your interests, whatever your hobbies, you might be into kayaking or knitting or Dungeons and Dragons, and there will always be, a dozen to 100 other people that are sharing that interest and whose societies you can join. We have over 300 societies, I think, in Edinburgh, around every interest and every sport that you could possibly do. So finding others through societies and in your programs is not that hard. So hopefully I've given you a little bit of an overview of what makes Edinburgh interesting and what makes PIR interesting. If you do have questions, you can absolutely connect with me, not only underneath this video, leave comments, I'll reply, but you can also send me an email if you want, and I will try to do my best. I hope this has been vaguely interesting and has helped you maybe shape some of the questions you might be asking at future open days or at future offer holder days. And I wish you all the best with your choice. See ya.